Thank you, thank you everyone for coming again to SIPCO. Today is Friday, 21st October, and SIP number 18 already. So we've been doing that for the past few months, and today we'll get Maddie to come on and talk about the status of mining lately. And we'll probably touch on, I think Maddie has some comments or questions about non-custodial mining. So just get into the mindset of what's coming after Stack 2.1. Yeah, so really thank everybody for coming. Really nice to see everybody again. Just trying to see who is on the chat. Anybody new? Yeah, maybe I'll still give a very quick overview of the SIP, just in case somebody new here. So in this call, we basically talk about anything SIP related. We share ideas, we share feedback. If you have any SIP ideas, you want to come on and talk about it, like please come on and have your ideas voiced, and we will try to leave every at the end of every session or beginning of every session to have some open floor kind of comments. And if you feel free to bring up any concern you have, any improvement you want to make to the the SIP process itself, or actual coming up with a new standard. Yeah, so here is a very collaborative effort and informative effort to inform the community what's going on, all this cool stuff goes on behind the background. So SIP is just a document that is just almost just like the spec that describes what the new feature or process is. So Stacks 2.1, in case anybody didn't know, is actually SIP 15. And last year, Stacks 2.05 is SIP 12, or what's SIP 12? So, things like NFTs, SIP 9, fungible tokens, SIP 10. So all this stuff needs standardizing. And this is the way we document stuff. The SIP process itself is SIP 000. So any process, relating to caps or SIP editors, how we improve things, what the scope of each group of people in the process can also be adjusted. Yeah, so just a quick SIP update. So we've got, starting from the earliest, I think, maybe that's, I'll go about that way. So we actually had a couple of people like proposing new SIP ideas, which is amazing because these people are from the community itself. They are not from Stacks Foundation or Hero. So it's really great to see that we have organic SIP ideas coming out of the community. So one is from Werner and one is from Mutu. Werner's one is about BNS marketplaces trade. I think it will go towards a BNS V2. So that's amazing to see. And Mutu's one is about the node improvement. I think how you can practically self-verify instead of having like a very running, even though you can run on Raspberry Pi, as far as I understand, it's still very heavy on your Raspberry Pi, making it impractical to run and self-verify. So if we're able to improve that and able to self-verify more, we can all be more decentralized and not having to rely on other people's API. And SIP 15, so that's an important one coming, and Jude is working on that document. Maybe do you want to talk a little bit briefly?
Oh, sure. I mean, if you look at the text right now, currently uncommitted, but we'll have it by end of day. It kind of reads a lot like a change log. Here's the new things. Here's the things that are getting changed, proposed to be changed. Here are the things proposed to be fixed, as well as, rationales for all of the proposed changes. Broadly speaking, there's three categories of changes: improvements to stacking, improvements to block validation, and improvements to clarity. Regarding stacking, like the big ones that are user facing are, make it so that there's no more cooldown period, make it so your stacks automatically unlock if you don't get a reward slot. The big ones for clarity are a whole bunch of things to make it easier to interact with Bitcoin. And there's also a new way to deal with traits, which I think will make some of the corner cases of doing so will a lot less painful. And regarding block validation, there's a couple changes that will make the mempool perform better. That's at least that's the user-facing side of it. Right now, for example, you can get a transaction stuck in a few ways that we've now hit in runtime. Like if for example, at the end of running your transaction, your fee is too low to pay your fee, then your transaction stays in the mempool until it gets evicted, until you RBF it, and that's a pain in the butt, and it's caused some pain for users. But fortunately, that can get fixed through the 2.1 release, where we just make it so such transactions are just where you make it so you have to pay your fee up front, and you just get notified in advance if it's too low. So things of that nature. Mostly it's user-facing improvements that could not be done through any other means because they affect the consensus rules.
Cool. And it will go into draw first, or would it go straight to it being accepted? Because we haven't got SIP editors right now. Officially.
I'm technically also a SIP editor, so I can just say it's fine, but accepted.
Okay.
But it will not go to recommended until the governance and technical cabs sign off on it, which I am not a part of. So even though I'm on the steering committee, I don't have unilateral power to just force something through.
Yeah, so that's touches on the future to-do list for me, to build out that earlier process. So Jude is already stepping away from the cabs, just in steering committee, but by the sound of, so we will get more people officially into this process, so Jude can also step away from that. So we hope to keep making improvement this quarter and next quarter, hopefully. Thanks a lot. So a few outstanding stuff. I think just SIP 13 waiting for Aaron, but I think he's away, so I think Bryce or someone else offered to pick that up. So I think
that was me. I volunteered for that last week, and then
no worries.
did not get to it yet, but
No,
it's on my list still.
I know you guys got like the stack SIP on one thing to do.
Right.
No worries. So it's more about informing where people are at, really, the community, where things at. So no worries. And SIP 18, I think that's a bit of live, and I think there's a bit of conversation which I'll touch on a little bit later about the unstructured side of things. Notification update, so that one I think is still Raphael is going back and forth between I think is nearly the end now, so I think just making changes based on Fridger's comments, so we can see where that goes. But I think SIP 18 is still waiting for Stats 2.1 to be alive in order to be officially ratified.
Yep, there's a couple clarity built-ins it relies upon that are proposed into the SIP 15.
Yeah, some consensus buff or something like that. So
Yep, exactly. Makes it easy to convert between a serialized clarity value and the clarity value itself, which is great if you're building something like an Oracle or some other sort of off-chain service that needs to relay data to a smart contract.
Cool. And just to remind everybody, SIP 16 is updated, is ratified. So please use that standard wherever you can, any NFT marketplaces and wallets or whatnot. So that's the top overview.
Hello,
and some
I have a question.
Sure.
So what's your type? Recent Storm Twilight or recent?
Sorry. Hello, can you repeat that again?
I think that was a spam guest.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, sounded normal, but okay, I'll move on. A few requests for comment. These are the conversation that you can get in early and have your say and have a piece in shaping what that's gonna look like in the future. Things like derivation path, safe token transfer, minor centralization stuff, BNS v2. So yeah, so all this stuff. So things are, so I just had to look at the GitHub, some the PR that Mike and Marvin submitted with to do with safe transfer. I think we just need more comments on that. Not as many people commented yet, so I think the more heads we can get into that one, the better we can move to the next stage. I'll try to highlight that in different channels too. So yeah, and we'll get Fridger to come in and talk about his authentication protocol in draft stage. So I noticed a couple of new things in GitHub. So this is just to do with a list of traits. I don't think from what I read on GitHub, I think Mike didn't think it was as clear as it could be or where to find it. And Jason made some suggestions. Jason, do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, so we were just looking for the testnet deployments for some of those contracts, because like in my mind, you would have a local version that you deploy when you're doing like your DevNet stuff. And then when you get to testnet and mainnet, you'd want to point to the actual traits or contracts that are out there. And I couldn't find the testnet addresses for SIP9 and SIP10. And instead of asking around, we were just kind of like, hey, let's raise this and see what others think. But I thought under the activation section to add something real simple of like, hey, this is where it's deployed. And it would like bring you back into the SIP to find that information anyway.
So the suggestion is to add a little bit section into each relevant SIP, right?
Yeah. So like if a SIP involves deploying a contract and that contract is going to be the main reference, right, like it is for SIP9 and for SIP10, and that's the case for the traits, then I think it would make sense to have a little section that's just like, here they are. And for both testnet and mainnet.
Sounds good.
Yeah, is that okay? Like even the edit the ratified document, and who would do that?
It's just supplementary material, so it's not changing the requirements or the design of the system. It's just providing extra information.
Okay, so somebody just need to submit a pull request for that. Is that right? Cool.
It might even be good just to have, like, maybe there could be like a wiki article even on the SIP's GitHub that just has a page that talks about all the reference, the addresses for all the traits, so they're just all in one place. Just a thought.
Yeah, that was actually Mike's suggestion. And I kind of went back and forth because I was like, do we want a list that we're going to maintain in a separate spot, or did we want to put it like on each SIP to make sure it has the info? Ideally, I'd like both, but I was trying to think of like what the lowest lift maintenance wise was.
Yeah, you could easily do the single SIP. Because these things can't change once they're deployed, it's certainly safe to make many copies of it. It's not like you have to go change them later.
It won't change, right?
Yeah, it can't.
Oh, you can. Okay.
They're on the, I mean, like, you know, unless there's a deep chain reorg.
All right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, no, they're there. I think the other concern here too is like with the traits I saw definitely on testnet and in a few cases on mainnet. I saw where people are like deploying their own versions of the trait, which functionally would work, but when you're doing something of like a search by trait for certain contracts, you're going to be missing out on data. So that was the other piece of it too, was just to kind of like wrap it around and make sure that people are using the correct deployed contracts.
Oh, this actually reminds me, one of the more interesting subtle things coming in 2.1 is when you supply a trait arguments to a contract call, it doesn't have to implement the specific trait in the use trait statement. It can just be a trait that's compatible. It's meant to specifically address concerns like this, where if someone makes a copy of their own trait by mistake, they can still use it with another contract that expects a different trait that just happens to have the same interface or compatible interface.
So it's like basically as long as they are the same, then they would be considered compatible.
Yeah, or even if one's a superset of the other, as long as it has the same methods. Yeah.
Okay, well that's good news too. You know, in that case, I would probably lean toward just having something like this where per SIP you would say these are the contracts and this is where they're deployed. But yeah, either way, if there's, I'm happy to help with that. It was just something we caught and wanted to bring up for others to look at too.
Oh yeah, there's no barrier to sending a PR that just adds that as like a footnote or an extra section with just supplemental material. So feel free.
Sweet.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Amazing. Yeah, so next one is to do with the SIP 18. I checked with Kieran. I think that issue just need to track the need of incorporating that into SIP 18 and gauge some opinions. So if you guys have any comments, please feel free to chime in on this specific issue. And Werner, yes, so he's on the call is to do with his ideas for, or he's from the conversation Fridger's had with various people, and he's sort of taken all the conclusion and putting into a SIP idea. So yeah, so for this particular one, just briefly, because we don't have as much time because we need to get into meat of the session. But just briefly, it's going to be about the marketplace trades. And what we'll do with this is we'll find SIP mentors to help Werner get through the process. And any point in time, if he runs into challenges, we'll hopefully, the goal is to have people who are on as core Devi can submit these ideas, and we'll have a process and support system help everybody in the community from the beginning to the end finish the process and get it incorporated. So yes, I'm really looking forward to that one. Any comments, Werner?
Thank you, Hero. The first thing with the status of the draft that where it's in right now is I'm mostly interested in, okay, is the structure I have set out, is that okay? Can we work with that? If there's any feedback for that, I'm very happy to get it. And I'm a little bit struggling still with the more generalized interface. So I'm not sure, should I mention just the generalized interface, and that's to use any token on the marketplace, or should I also mention the list in microstacks? So is it one or the other? Should I put both in the standard, or should I only post the generalized one? So I'm not sure about that. And I think I've already gotten some good feedback from Dan and Friedger and Mike. So that's going to be helpful in getting to the next draft, basically.
Cool. Yeah, so let's catch up in DM and let me know what support you need, and I can find those support for you. Is that okay?
Yeah, I just need time. Can you give me time?
Yeah, sure. You have this quarter. But then no, thank you so much. This is what we want to engender and foster the community to try and do. This will really decentralize the process of getting new ideas into Stacks blockchain. Thank you, Werner. Yeah, so just some early stage stuff, BNS, as you know, and if anybody like opposes 2.1, like this is the time you gotta say now, because we are coming right up. So yeah, I will, if you got anything to say, please comment on the Stacks forum. Yeah, for now. Yeah, a bit of Stacks, GitHub integration, and a bit of this. And now let's get into, sorry, keep everybody waiting. Let's get into the Stacks mining report. Mari?
Hey, Hero. Thanks for that. Cool. Let me share my screen here. All right. Everybody can see this article.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Okay. All right, cool. So we've spoken, in previous calls about mining in more detail. I don't want to go through, everything that we've done in the past, but just kind of a refresher. Ran a recent quarterly update on the state of Stacks mining, so we can go through that, and then obviously we'll have some time. If people have more general questions about Stacks mining or about some ideas for improving it, and then also I personally would like to just get a refresher with you, Jude, about obviously there's some really big features in 2.1 that go a long way to removing the blockers to enabling things like non-custodial mining pools. But if memory serves correct, there'll still be at least some hurdles remaining. And so I want to, for even just for my own benefit, refresh what those specifically were. But before we get into that, let's just go through, the general state of Stacks mining, refresh everybody's memory. Obviously, Stacks is pretty unique in its consensus mechanism of proof of transfer, right? You're actually sending Bitcoin transactions to mine Stacks. And so because you're mining Stacks by sending a Bitcoin transaction, the very act of mining Stacks is literally the process of writing to the Bitcoin chain, right? That's a lot of how Stacks is secured to Bitcoin. And so if you're looking to learn more about that in general, this article posted on Sigil and shared on my Twitter has some links to some additional resources you can learn more about mining in general. But this recent update really covers the past year, so Q3 of last year to current, and the past quarter, so the last few months. So block frequencies. So how long does it take blocks to actually settle on Stacks? In theory, right, it would be about every 10 minutes, which is about what Bitcoin does, right, about every 10 minutes. But in reality, there's some Bitcoin blocks that Stacks misses, and that seems to be improving a bit over time. Might be some random noise, but the past year, it's taken about 11.5 minutes per Stacks block. In the past quarter, so more recently, that's dropped down to closer to 11 minutes. So seems like Stacks is missing fewer Bitcoin blocks, and obviously things like subnets and a lot of the work that's coming in the near future will drastically increase those settlement times further. In terms of the number of unique miners who mined at least one block during the past year and the past quarter, there were almost 80. There were 78 miners who mined at least one block during the past year. And in the past quarter, there were 25 miners who mined at least one block. So there's definitely a decent number of entities out there that are aware of Stacks mining and that have at least experimented with doing it. However, when you look at how many of those, are sticking around, are consistently mining, are mining every single block, for example, or most blocks, that's a bit different. So if we look at the total number of miners typical and the number of miners that it would take to exceed 50% of mining activity, that is respectively here in this chart as blue and orange. And so we can see that over the past year, there's been about 6.9 miners per block on average. In the past quarter, that has dipped. We're in a bear market. We're in a bear market for both BTC USD and Stacks BTC. So this is going to be somewhat expected that, as the value of mining decreases, all else equal, you'll have fewer miners, and so there's been about a drop from 7 typical miners per block to 6 typical miners per block, and the number of miners it would take to collude to execute a greater than 50% attack, right? Typically called a 51% attack, because humans like integers, but technically all you need is greater than 50%, not literally 51%. That number has dropped from 3.4 to 2.7, so about 3 miners. So not the largest numbers here, but still, still takes multiple parties to collude in order to kind of launch any kind of attack on a blockchain. There are other protections that Stacks has, even if that happens, such as the unique case that launching an attack on Stacks is literally the process of mining Bitcoin, as we mentioned, or not mining Bitcoin, but sending Bitcoin transactions, as we mentioned, which means that every single attempt at an attack is written to the public ledger of Bitcoin. So unlike Bitcoin mining, where you could secretly build, a hash rate, a farm of miners in secret, and then turn it all on at once and theoretically attack the network, that is not possible with stacks. And so even though these numbers might seem low, yes, they are low. Yes, we should be trying to improve them. There are other additional means of protection and decentralization that stacks has beyond just the aggregate number of miners being involved.
If I could just say something to that number real quick, Maddie.
Yeah.
That's actually about the same as it is for Ethereum and Bitcoin. I'm not trying to say that we can't improve. Of course, we definitely should be trying to improve, but for Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's also between 2 and 3 miners on a given day are required to get to 51% attack these chains.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's very important context. Thank you, Jude. Yeah. So if you're saying that the largest 3 miners on stacks would have to collude to launch a 50% attack, that is not materially different than the largest 3 miners on Bitcoin having more than 50%, or largest 3 miners on Ethereum, especially probably since they moved to proof of stake. I imagine that's gotten even more concentrated. Haven't specifically looked at that recently, although, we know that the OFAC thing is an issue, but that is definitely outside the scope of what we're talking about right now. Okay, so that's one way of looking at the number of miners, the concentration of miners. Another one is the Gini coefficient. This is a bit, less interpretable, but more kind of a continuous metric rather than this kind of discrete, just number of miners. The Gini coefficient, for those unfamiliar, is a popular way of quantifying basically inequalities in systems. So it's often used in measuring like income inequality, for example. How much bigger are the big or wealthy parties than the smaller or poorer parties? And in this context, we can use it to kind of analyze how much bigger are big stacks miners versus small stacks miners. So if everyone was the equal size, everyone was on level playing field in size, which is, more or less an optimal kind of approach for decentralization, because then it would take even more miners to launch a 50% attack. You'd be at a value of 1. And then if you have the extreme inequality, the value approaches 0. And so here we see the Gini coefficient over time. It has, did I say that correctly? Yeah. It has been increasing a little bit over time. It has increased recently. And so it's somewhat of a decent, sorry, I think I inverted this, which is confusing me. This is, again, one of the weaknesses of the Gini coefficient, is that the interpretability is confusing. I know we've had this confusion a couple times on the monthly mining calls. So the Gini value would be approaching 0 if everyone's equal. Yeah, I should have said this. So this is the typo. I'll have to go back and fix that. The Gini value approaches 0 if everyone's equal, approaches 1 if everyone is unequal, if there's a wide disparity between richer and poorer. And so we've seen the Gini coefficient go up a bit, which is indicative of kind of the same pattern of miners in general getting a bit more concentrated. So one interesting thing, though, that the Gini coefficient captures that the number of miners doesn't, is that even if the number of miners stays the same, let's say there's, still 6 miners in total, the distribution of those miners, so bigger, some of those 6 could become bigger relative to the smaller of those 6. That would not be captured in just looking at the total number of miners. That is captured in looking at the Gini coefficient. So it's still somewhat useful metric for tracking overall decentralization. Again, has some weaknesses in interpretability and kind of applicability. So other insights, other takeaways from recent mining performance. The number of transactions per block has been holding steady, if not slightly increasing. It was definitely helped by, by the more recent flurry of activity around BNS domain names. But over the past year, there's been about 51 transactions per block, and the past quarter, 55 transactions per block. And that's, all else equal, that's promising to see. Given that we're in a bear market, usage of the network is still staying relatively constant. And then also, you still have some miners that are running somewhat outdated versions of the mining software. So they're like mining blocks that have very, very few, even as few as one transaction in the block, which is pulling us down. And as we release, recent fixes have already been rolled out that Jude, I'm sure, can get into more detail about. And also as we do more hard forks that force miners to kind of upgrade software, this should all else equal improve. Even if activity doesn't itself increase, you'll just have fewer blocks that have these like one transaction per blocks being cleared. Then if we look at Stacks miner fees as a percent of total rewards, right? Why does this matter? Well, just like mining Bitcoin, right? If you mine Bitcoin, you earn a block reward and you earn the gas fees that people doing Bitcoin transactions are paying, right? Same concept in Stacks. If you mine Stacks, you earn a block reward and you earn the Stacks gas fees people are paying to miners to process their transactions. If in theory you want the blockchain to become more sustainable in the long run, it's important that the fee portion of rewards becomes larger and larger. Otherwise, you're just going to need to rely on block rewards forever. And obviously, this is still a topic of debate even in Bitcoin. It's one of the key distinctions between like Bitcoin and Monero, right? Where Monero basically cloned Bitcoin's kind of approach, except for the fact that they have tail emissions, so they have no kind of end to block rewards, whereas Bitcoin does an end to block rewards. Regardless, what you want to see in both cases, in all cases, is higher percent of fees as total rewards, because then miners are basically incentivized to mine even if block rewards go away, because there's so much activity, there's so much fees being generated. The past year, fees have been about 1.26% of total rewards. Past quarter, though, only about 0.45%. So how do we reconcile these two things, right? Because fees have gone down considerably, even though the number of transactions that we've seen has stayed the same or gone up slightly. Well, basically, that means that fees per transaction are much lower. So that's perhaps one thing to think about. I know there's been some work in progress and being rolled out to help foster a Stacks, marketplace fee, a fee market for gas fees that Stacks participants are paying. Certainly, as all else equal, as things like subnets come and more usage of the network comes and higher transaction numbers in general arrive, all else equal, you'd expect more fees as a percent of total rewards to increase. But there's also this is potentially indicating that some further work needs to be done for facilitating a fee marketplace to develop on Stacks. And then another thing to look at, of course, this is probably the biggest thing that people from a miner's point of view care about, at least, right, is profit margins for mining. Right. And so this is not an APY, right? This is not like an annualized figure. This is the profit margin, right? So if I invest 100 sats, what percent profit margin am I getting on those 100 sats? So for example, a 10% profit margin indicates if I invest 100 sats, I get 110 sats back. That could be over a day. That could be over a month. That could be over a year, right? So this is not in and of itself an APY. It is a per period, per unit of investment rate of return. And so we have over time, the profit margin here in blue. You can see it's averaged about hovering about over 10%, about 12% historically. Now in recent times during the bear market, it has dipped, but somewhat promisingly, it seems like miners have kind of overcorrected, right? We saw that miners dropped from like 7 to 6. We saw that there's now a flurry of transactions, especially recently for BNS stuff. And so in recent history, the profit margin has actually jumped up to hitting pretty much all-time highs, or at least highs over the course of the entire last year, and hitting as high as 20% recently. So over the past year, profit margin has been about 12.5%, has been about 10% in the past quarter, but in the even more recent history, mining right now is considerably profitable, almost twice as profitable as kind of historically it has been on average. And so hopefully that is indicative of the fact that miners have kind of overcorrected. All else equal, we should expect to see a bit of a return of more miners, more decentralization, and that's still in a bear market, right? So as the market turns back into a bull market, hopefully, this is even more hopeful that there'll be even more mining activity coming in, because in general, the more the rewards worth for mining, the more miners they're expected to be. And finally, an important piece to look at, especially in the context of asking the question of, if mining's so profitable, why aren't there more miners? Well, one of the biggest reasons is the capital requirement to mine, because as we've mentioned, you need to spend Bitcoin, you need to spend sats in order to mine. So you're not sending those into a void, right? You're spending sats in order to get stacks. So there is a profit margin. There is, ideally, or most of the time, a net profit that you're making. However, it still requires having that capital, having that Bitcoin up front in order to invest it. And so this is just one way of looking at the capital requirements, basically looking at, hey, ignoring all the income or all the revenue you're getting, just saying if you wanted to mine one cycle, how much Bitcoin would you need to spend, ignoring if you're recycling some of that stacks you win back into Bitcoin by selling the stacks to buy Bitcoin, just simplifying it by ignoring that. How much money would you have to spend? How much Bitcoin would you have to spend to mine an entire cycle at just a break-even rate, right? So not even making a profit, just breaking even. And that is currently, over the past year, that has been about 1.2 Bitcoin required, so about $23,000-ish. Over the past quarter, it's gone up a bit. So 1.4 Bitcoin, or about $27,000. So as anyone, everyone listening probably thinking, that's a relatively considerable expense, right? For just your hobbyist miner. And in my opinion, having looked at a lot of this data, having looked at a lot of this analysis, having compiled a larger report previously that's linked in this document, I'm of the opinion that this capital intensivity is most likely, the biggest single factor that prevents more miners from coming online, more miners from joining, because even mining Bitcoin with its cost,
what is your name, baby?
Whoop. I don't know if that was a question or just some spam. I'm going to move on. Even mining Bitcoin, buying an ASIC is not cheap, right? It's like a few $1,000s, maybe $5,000, but it's certainly not, $27,000 every one cycle, every 2.5, 3 weeks ish. So there's a high capital intensivity, and the best way, there's a couple of proposals in the works to fix this. One, in the short term, this concept of dust mining we can talk about, but I think in the long term, the best way to fix this is just like Bitcoin mining, solves this with mining pools to reduce your kind of volatility, so you don't need to make a huge investment in hardware to reduce your volatility. I'm going to keep moving on. The best fix in the context of stacks is to do non-custodial mining pools. 2.1 adds support for several of those critical features, but I'd love to hear from Jude what still remains to be done after 2.1 to enable those. So just wrapping up, there's been a little bit of a increase, or I should say decrease, in decentralization, but that's a little bit to be expected, as we're in a bear market. There's some promising signs, network activity has held up. The number of miners it takes to launch a 50% attack hasn't changed that drastically, and is still relatively comparable to others. And so there's some promising signs, especially as we look at the features on the roadmap that are unique, that are intentionally aimed at solving many of these things, like subnets and others that are right around the corner. So it hasn't been the best quarter for miners, but it's been reasonably profitable, and especially profitable of even more lately. And I think indicates that we should, all else equal, expect to see some more miners returning in the near future. happy to discuss any questions or community thoughts. I know Jude, you might want to chat to some things, and I certainly would love to hear. I'm sure people in general are interested about non-custodial mining pools. You know, what in your eyes after 2.1 still needs to be done to enable those is something I'd love to chat about.
Yeah, sure. So the thing is in 2.1, we're adding a couple things. The ability, first of all, to pay to SegWit addresses, including taproot addresses, when it comes to mining. So instead of paying to the key that mined the block, the miner can send their Bitcoin, they can send their stacks to a stacks address of their choosing. They can send it to either a different standard address, so like a cold wallet, or they can send it to a smart contract. You would probably rely on the latter to implement a decentralized mining pool, because when it comes to SegWit support in Stacks 2.1, you will have the ability to mine with a SegWit address, and that also includes a taproot address, or more generally speaking, there will exist a cheap way by which a threshold of signatures can be used to sign off on block commits. So what that means is that it should be possible for on the order of 1,000 users, let's say, to collectively sign a single Bitcoin transaction that commits to a block, and that they can ensure that the block they are mining sends the stacks to a smart contract, as well as include some extra transaction logic in the block that makes sure that the individuals who contributed Bitcoin can receive a pro rata share of the stacks when they materialize. Once you can get all that working, you can build a decentralized mining pool, because then your flow as a user is, I get some Bitcoin, I sign off on this block commit, I make sure I'm getting my share, and that block should have become the winning block. And then if it does, I just later on go and claim my pro rata share of the stacks after the stacks materialize, which is after 100 confirmations. To speak to the SegWit aspect of it, we can technically do this right now with Moosig or Frost, where you can make it so that K of N holders of a piece of the private key can collectively generate a signature. You can do this with quorum groups and Taproot, many different avenues here that we're currently exploring. But the point is, though, these two features are adding the building blocks needed to implement decentralized mining pools. To speak to another point you made just earlier, just briefly, you mentioned the fees somehow, the fees that are being aggregated to miners being smaller than they have been in the past, despite the transaction volume going up. That's likely due to the fact that the miner has simply gotten better at packaging blocks, so you don't have to pay an exorbitantly high fee to get your transaction included, because miners are just better at filling a block than they have in the past. Other thing is that, and this is a paper I can share with you offline. You actually need the Coinbase to be somewhat big relative to the amount of fees in order for mining to be incentive compatible. If the fees in a block are so high that they make the Coinbase, negligible, and make it like a small, let's say less than half of the block reward, what that would do is, if that went on for long enough, is miners would actually stop confirming blocks, and they would try to mine the smallest blocks they could, such that someone else would be encouraged to mine a block on top of their block, thereby allowing them to materialize their block reward. I don't yet know what the best way is to address this, but I know that some folks out of Nari Anand's group at Princeton have looked at this very problem. Like, what happens to Bitcoin when the block reward becomes small? Well, mining stops being incentive compatible.
Right. Interesting.
Which is a surprising result. It's not something that was well understood in Satoshi's time, for example.
Yeah, I know it's still a debate. I haven't heard it framed as explicitly a problem with the block reward as much as it is of just total rewards. And in theory, if transaction rewards replace the block rewards, that could work. But yeah, that sounds interesting. I would love to dig into that.
Right. The crux of the problem is the TLDR, is that because miners can choose how much transactions go into their block and what they leave in the mempool, and by extension, they can choose what amount of reward they can expect to receive. That creates this whole weird warped incentive space now, where miners are petty compliant with mining. They'll mine one transaction and leave the rest to be claimed in the hopes that someone will at least confirm that one transaction. Because if they take too much, no one's going to confirm that, because that leaves less money on the table for other miners to pick up.
Gotcha. I see. So you need to mine enough to be profitable, but if you're doing everything, then no one else is gonna mine.
Yeah, you got to somehow force miners to do all or nothing on outstanding transaction fees.
Yeah. Okay. Odd. Yeah. How? I mean, briefly, is Stacks thinking about this for tail emissions, or is there
Right.
any
So that's actually the reason that Stacks has a Coinbase forever in its blocks. It peters
Yep.
out to 128 stacks, I think in like 20 years or something like that.
Yep.
But it stays at 128, precisely to de-risk this sort of thing if we can't think of a better way to deal with the problem.
Right. Yeah. Which is kind of what Monero did as well, and what Bitcoin, and some believe that Bitcoin will end up doing at some point. But yeah.
It could very well be that Bitcoin miners monopolize Stacks at some point, because Stacks will give them a reward, even if the Bitcoin block doesn't.
Right. That'd be interesting. So the Stacks block reward would effectively function as Bitcoin's tail for emissions.
Exactly. It doesn't even have to be Stacks. Like, you can obviously fork Stacks and make a system that serves this very purpose, and that could even be a BIP at some point.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, that'd be awesome. Yeah, we've spoken about how it's almost inevitable, at least if Stacks succeeds, that Bitcoin miners become Stacks miners almost exclusively, right? Because if I mine a Bitcoin block, I can say I'm the only person bidding on this Stacks block. So I feel it feels related to that concept.
Yeah, exactly. They would get the Stacks block reward as well as the Bitcoin block reward in this case.
Yeah. Cool. So sorry, but just to circle back to custodial mining pools, you talked about how 2.1 will enable sending the Bitcoin bid from a multi-sig wallet, essentially from a pool of people, and receiving the Stacks reward, the Stacks that's won, to a smart contract that can then distribute pro rata. Is there any other than implementation, right, of those building a pool that has those features, makes use of those? Is there any other technical blockers, though, that 2.1 doesn't address to custodial mining pools?
So 2.1 one thing I think that's kind of the hardest remaining problem actually isn't consensus breaking, but it's just implementing this efficient multi-sig mechanism. You could do a multi-sig system today. The problem with Bitcoin multi-sig right now, though, like that isn't SegWit or Taproot or Moosig, is that the size of the transaction increases linearly with the number of signers, so it doesn't scale very well. If we were to go out and build a mining pool right now, we would want to use something like Frost or Moosig to do this key aggregation step, so that you could have one signature on that block commit, but it will have had to have been generated by many signers.
Right.
I believe Taproot allows Schnorr signatures, which are a bit easier to use with this general mechanism. I'm not a cryptographer, so I don't know the deep, intricate details. But I do know that signature aggregation is something that Schnorr does, whereas something like Moosig is key aggregation. And I don't know if it's as rigorously studied. But I believe there are other people on the call who might be able to answer this better than I can.
Yeah, to address that, the older and more better known algorithm Music does not support threshold signing. And so at this point, we are looking exclusively at Frost or potentially Taproot for threshold signing, where you would require a subset of the initial parties to generate a signature. And in all these cases, the shared nobody's constructing the shared secret. What happens is that each party constructs a share of the signature.
And the signatures can be added together with opcheck SIGAD, right?
Correct, but but this is done on Frost is done offline. It's the signature aggregation is done outside of Bitcoin, and
yeah, that's good to know, because that's the biggest scalability barrier to doing multi-sig today. Having to do all the signature having to require each participant to post a signature to the Bitcoin chain. If that could be combined into a single signature, then this problem goes away. You can have as many signers as you can throw into a network of individuals doing this off-chain MPC.
Yeah, so for using Frost, which you can think of it as multi-party Schnorr, what we would have is we would have several Stacks participants communicate potentially via the current Stacks P2P network to share, numbers which represent, commitments and individual short signatures. And then after a couple of rounds of communication, any one of these participants could aggregate, all the shares of the signatures, and then one of them then could sign a regular looking, Bitcoin transaction. And so this would be kind of this signature aggregation would happen outside of Bitcoin, whereas on Taproot, the Bitcoin protocol is playing a bigger role on the signature aggregation.
Yeah, and once you have this combined signature, the transaction on the Bitcoin chain just looks like a normal block commit with a single signer, or at least
it looks like a regular. It looks indistinguishable as a paid to script hash, right?
I believe so, but I don't. I have only skimmed the Frost paper. I don't know the exact details off the top of my head. But assuming that building block is no longer blocked technically on the stack side, like we could build this mechanism out today in a miner. The remaining task would be to just ensure that the stacks materialize to this mining smart contract, and that smart contract is written in a way so that if you paid Bitcoin, you get proportionally much stacks. That could simply be it. That's actually somewhat easier than I originally thought would be required to happen, because like simply the act of you adding your signature to the block commit would just be the act of making sure that the smart contract is paying you stacks that you are due. Like you would just look when you mine the block, like the block might contain a transaction the pool puts in that says like, Alice gets this much stacks when it materializes, and Bob gets this much stacks, and Charlie gets this much stacks, and you just check that you're getting your share before you sign.
Yeah, I think there could be a way to merge, if I'm following you, would be merging mining transactions along with peg out transactions.
Not quite what I was saying, but what I was suggesting here is that like users wouldn't need to post any sort of proof that they sent some Bitcoin to the mining pool address, which I had said in the past in the forum. If it's sufficient that users just inspect the block before they sign off on it to ensure the block is paying them their due.
I've heard good things about Frost from Bitcoiners on Twitter, so must be a pretty cool tech. Just because we only got a few minutes left, is it okay to wrap up?
Yeah, good with me.
And maybe we can have a separate session about custodial, non-custodial mining pool, if you like, Matty.
Sure. Yeah.
This is something we pay a grant for at the foundation. Like it's greenfield, it's pretty self-contained. There's even a sketch of an implementation somewhere you can start with if it's something that interests you.
Yeah. So yeah, if anybody interested, yeah. So yeah, thank you everyone. So just if we got any comments, last comments, please feel free to voice it now. Okay, so just a reminder for everybody to comment on various stuff like SIP 13, 19, BNS 2.1, stickers, and any oppositions or any new SIPs coming up. Please feel free to comment them on Stacks forum and GitHub. And just a bit of sneak peek on the work I'm doing to encourage the voters. So this is the concept I was talking about earlier, but yeah, I got in touch with the designer and we're coming up with a proper design banner. So it looked like this on Twitter. So during the voting process, the last thing you would do is to detect the NFT in your wallet, and it will add a banner, and you just download it as a JPEG, not on chain. So yeah, just, you know, yeah, I hope everybody likes it, but it's work in progress. Oh yeah, so upcoming next, oh, what the hell, sorry. Next week is steering committees. Yeah, steering committee update for October. Yeah, so please join. And the week after, on the 4th of November, hopefully we get independent and Dev to review the Stacks 2.1 SIP. Give his commentary, give his anything he wishes. So yeah, please come and listening to that call. And that's it. Thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Maddie, for coming and presenting the quarterly update. That was really informative.
Yeah,
Yep.
my pleasure. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Hero.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you everyone.